Now we got a guest for you who's a bit of a progressive hero. He was just Democrat back in 2018, nearly won the election in the middle of Kansas. And he also was on the platform committee last time around in 2016 as a Bernie Sanders representative. And he introduced an anti-corruption amendment, basically what Wolfpack wants to do. It was awesome. He is on the rules. So he was on the rules committee this time around and caused a ruckus. That's mainly what we're going to talk about. But he's also set up a new law firm too, welderfirm.com, where he's kicking insurance companies' asses. Catastrophic injury and wrongful death is what they do. Welderfirm.com. So it's Brent Welder, everybody. Brent, back to the Young Turks.
Oh my God, it's like old times. I'm so glad to be back with you, Cenk.
Absolutely. So, Brent, you also apparently have a story about 2016 and the DNC and Hillary Clinton folks regarding TYT. I have not heard the story yet. I can't wait. It's apparently related to how we were denied a press pass this time around. So that's a juicy one. But what you did at the Rules Committee was awesome. So tell us about what you proposed at the Rules Committee, and then we'll talk about what the reaction was.
Sure. Well, as you're well aware, a huge, enormous issue to me, and one of the reasons I've been a TYT member for now probably a good part of a decade, is because I think the most important issue is getting the corrupting influence of money out of politics. And when Bernie Sanders gave me this unbelievable opportunity to actually sit on these DNC committees that they would never ever allow me to get anywhere near under any other circumstances, I wanted to use it as an opportunity to either actually root some corruption out of the DNC if I could get the DNC members to go along with me on it, right? Or B, the more likely scenario, expose the corruption that is occurring right out in the open to make sure that people across the country and the National Press Corps and everyone gets to see it. So that's what I did.
So what exactly was the rule that you thought the DNC should apply?
So there was a number of rules that I proposed, but the one that kind of got the most attention was two things that I think are obvious and common sense. One, no corporate PAC money being allowed to the DNC, which is actually similar to a rule they've already passed and they already have in place. And all my amendment would have done was strengthen it and make it more permanent by putting it into the party charter. And number two, not letting corporate lobbyists literally sit on the DNC. It didn't ban them from the building. It certainly didn't ban them from their favorite place, the halls of Congress or the administration. It just said, how about we don't have actual corporate lobbyists sitting on the DNC? So, I had an anti-corruption amendment that I brought along those lines.
So, who did the other side have speak against your proposed rule?
So as a little bit of background, in 2016, when I was on the platform committee and I put forth an amendment to say that as a party we should stand for not having the corrupting influence of money in politics, the very first person that they had speak against my amendment was actually a corporate lobbyist that was serving on the committee. And at the time, I thought it was a hilarious mistake on their part, right? Like, oh wow, how perfect for my message. Literally the first person they put up to speak against it is a corporate lobbyist. Well, to my surprise, 4 years later, this year, I put forth my anti-corruption amendment on the Rules Committee. They literally had a hand-picked corporate lobbyist that was sitting on the Rules Committee that was the first person to speak against my amendment. And it was at that moment that I realized they actually don't even think it's a bad thing to have the corporate lobbyists on the committee. They literally think it's a good thing. And they're bragging about it right out in the open.
Yeah, so a lot of the corporate lobbyists that voted against you that are on the DNC and on the Rules Committee represent insurance companies, banks, Pakistan. I mean, it's absurd. It's unbelievably absurd. So didn't they try to table your resolution first? Didn't Frank give you some weird or non-existent excuse for that?
So Sludge actually did some tremendous reporting afterwards, and they actually have already identified 11 corporate lobbyists that were literally sitting on the committee that I was trying to get this passed through, including both of the chair people of the committee, okay, that were either corporate lobbyists or their job is corporate influence. And then to almost almost do more to expose the corruption than my amendment was even going to be able to do if they just did a regular vote. They actually used corrupt tactics and even rigged the voting device to try to make sure that my amendment not only was killed in the committee, but that there was never any record of how the members of the committee were voting on it.
And my favorite part was you asked Barney Frank for an explanation. He gave a word salad that made no sense. And you literally said, oh, okay, well then that makes no sense.
Well, and the thing is, the DNC had accidentally left my microphone on, or else I never would have been able to even protest that.
I love that. So you eventually did vote. And since your proposed rule is so clear and obvious, I mean, you don't want to have Democratic Party look like the party of corruption. You won the vote, right?
Absolutely not. In fact, let me clarify a little bit. They actually opened up the voting on my amendment. I went over to the voting device that they give us online, this virtual voting device, because of course I wanted to vote yes on my own amendment. What do you know? The voting device didn't work. It had been working perfectly the entire meeting for 2 hours. It didn't work. I kept going back as this corporate lobbyist was droning on about why people should vote against my amendment. Still didn't work, still didn't work. All of a sudden, there's this random motion in the middle of the voting to table my amendment, which I didn't even know. I was thinking, table until when? We've already heard about it. Why don't we just have a vote like we have on every other amendment that's been proposed? And so they actually had, I think, accidentally opened up the voting and then told their techies on the other side to not open up the voting, to actually literally rig the voting device so that people couldn't vote, so that they could get their motion to table in.
Yeah.
And they voted against it, of course.
Of course. Okay, what did it lose? Like 2-1?
Exactly. Virtually all the Bernie nominees voted for it, and all the DNC and Biden nominees voted against it.
And it seems to me that they just take it as par for the course. Like they're kind of puzzled by people like you and me, right, Brent? They're like, well, how do you expect us to make money if we can't get the politicians to kill Medicare for all for the insurance companies that we work for? So I guess the main question there, Brent, is we're never going to beat them while they're still in charge, right? With the Bidens of the world, they're never going to be like, oh, Brent, that's such a good point. Like your anti-corruption amendment is like 99% popularity in the country. Your rules committee proposal that we not have like lobbyists who people hate on the DNC is the 99% popular. They're never going to realize that. So is the only way to win on these rules that you keep proposing to win at the presidential level? And until we do that, we can't move this ball forward?
Yes, I completely agree with that. In fact, they're so brazen that they actually sent an intermediary to me, a friend of mine, someone who I was very trustworthy before the meeting, who called me up and told me that the Biden campaign was most upset of all the amendments that were proposed in the meeting, was most upset about my anti-corruption amendment that I was putting forth. So I don't see any hope for any change other than until we do it at the ballot box.
Yeah, and look, guys, you have to understand why. Because Biden thinks, hey, look, I'm in the middle of an election and I need all of my lobbyist friends to give me tons and tons of money. So what are you guys doing, man? Remember, I mean, this is how the ball game is played. That's why I said nothing would fundamentally change. I made a promise to those lobbyists and I got to keep it. And they think that's perfectly normal. They think that, yeah, that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to be corrupt like that. Anyway, okay, speaking of which, so this year around, when we thought there was gonna be an in-person DNC, we applied for credentials and they came back and said, no, we're limited on space because of coronavirus issues. Like limited on space, we're bigger than CNN and MSNBC and Fox News in social media, on Facebook, YouTube, etc. Are you like, really? And they say, oh yeah, really. But you have a story about that in regards to 2016, and I haven't heard it. So what is it?
So first of all, I was so extremely upset about the fact that the DNC was so stupid to deny you guys press credentials. In fact, I see it as complete and utter disrespect to the entire progressive community. I think it's literally the least they could do, right? Is like just let you cover a convention that's out there for the public anyway. But it made me think of 4 years ago when I was down in Florida for the platform committee. All the higher ups of the campaign and the presidential campaign, the DNC were there. And I got into a conversation just by happenstance with a couple of the very, very top communications people with the DNC and with Hillary Clinton's campaign. And during this conversation, I brought up what I thought was a very, very good idea that would help Hillary Clinton win the election. They had already been through a tough primary with Bernie Sanders. Bernie had been on your show, I believe, at least once, if not multiple times. And at that point, you were telling people it's time to vote for Hillary because she's so much better than Donald Trump. So I made the crazy suggestion that, hey, why don't you guys have Hillary Clinton go on TYT and get interviewed? I said they already are pushing for her to win. Yes, they'll ask fair questions, but they're fair. I've seen people of all different, political stripes go on the show, and they get asked, firm but fair questions. And frankly, their response was what was most shocking to me, and what was so telling about what they think of the progressive movement. It wasn't like, oh, no way, we would never go on with a progressive. It wasn't like, oh no, I just can't stand those people, whatever. They literally said they had never heard of your show or you before. And they were like perplexed as to why I was making this ridiculous suggestion to go on some show that they had literally never heard of, even though they just went through an entire primary where Bernie was on your show. I mean, it's inconceivable. You probably had even been on MSNBC at that point.
Yeah, I had already been on a primetime host on MSNBC, but it's not about me. Bernie Sanders, when he came on the first time in that primary, got 6 million. We got 6 million people who watched it. The second time he came on, it was like the Friday of Labor Day, and the primary was winding down. So we only got 4 million people who watched it. So for them to be that clueless, and the amount of money that our audience has raised for different Democratic candidates is in the millions upon millions. And for them to be that absolutely clueless about the digital world, that they're like, huh, what? Who is that? I mean, and then what happened, Brent? They got their ass kicked because Donald Trump killed them in digital.
I first started watching the Young Turks back when I literally was working for a state Democratic Party, 10 years ago. And so the fact that they have people in charge of these political operations at the national level that don't even know the most basic things and the most basic communications that are occurring to their base was mind-blowing, but also very educational as far as why they're having so much trouble with winning these important elections.
Last thing on that, look, guys. So we're bigger than CNN and all the cable news guys in social media today, but we were bigger than them 4 years ago too. And so
there was no doubt who the Young Turks were. I mean, it blew my mind.
It's not about us. It's that the Democratic Party, oftentimes because it's led by these feckless, corrupt folks, is totally clueless as to what's happening in the real country, and that's why they wind up losing as Hillary Clinton did, and it was a terrible, terrible mistake that they made, and they lost by 78,000 votes. Anyway, let's hope they don't repeat that mistake. But on the other hand, the idea of Joe Biden coming on the Young Turks, it doesn't look like it's around the corner. But
it would be literally one of the smartest things he could do if he wanted to get millions of extra votes, right? They're so quick to wonder why, they blame the progressives for losing every single time, but yet they never ever try to get the progressive votes. It's mind-blowing, it really is.
All right, Brent Welder, you're awesome. Thanks for fighting for progressives on the platform committee, the rules committee, in politics, and everything that you do. Thank you, brother. We appreciate it.
Thank you too. Talk to you later.
On the go? Don't worry, we got you covered. You can still listen to TYT at our new podcast network. Find us on Apple Podcasts, the Google Play Store, or at tyt.com/podcast.